All right, everyone. We're back with Dave, and we were just kind of talking offline a little bit about what happens on this progress to change. So you've identified last time we shared, you identified where are the gap, where is the gap that you want
Yeah.
from in your beingness of how you want to be and how you actually are. Where is that big gap? And you said, hey, I want to make a change here. Okay, so now you're looking to make this change, and then life shows up, or you revert back, or you make a mistake. What do we do then? Because that's gonna happen. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, it's interesting, man. I think a big part of it is, and I actually heard somebody say this today. A lot of people, they try to do too much stuff half-assed rather than get really, really good at a couple of things and then kind of layer in change, right? Because I think oftentimes we have good intentions and we look at this like, at least I do. I look at like this vision of who I want to be, and I have this grand vision of the like ultimate version of myself, right? And a lot of it is defined by the habits and disciplines that I do, right? Because you kind of are what you habitually do. So I think it's a good intention, but I think oftentimes they'll grab that and then they'll try to like be like, oh, I got to change everything at once. And what's going to happen is it's just overload for you, and you're going to end up like failing, getting discouraged, and all this stuff. So it's got to be like slow, incremental, layered in change. Now, there's also a certain limit of capacity that you can handle too, and you have to know what that is, right? So some people, you could handle changing two or three or maybe even four things at the same time. But like some people, like I said, they want to do like 50 different things, and it's all, ends up being half-ass effort at everything instead of really, really building that. Yeah, I mean, we were just talking about the challenge that we're doing, right? So I can kind of share a little bit about that. So we're doing this July challenge on Instagram. My wife and I have been hosting it. And it's basically like people are challenged to add something or remove something from their life and then check in with us every day because we're posting every day. So I shout everybody out, and then they're supposed to check in. What I've noticed is a lot of people have a lot of difficulty with simple instructions and can't even do that check-in part, which is interesting. But there have been a group of people that have been doing very well and are very consistent. And one of the things, so I had an add-in, which was stretching every day because I'm super inflexible and I work out a lot. You know that's important for recovery, right? So I'm working on stretching, and just crazy day on Tuesday, and I missed it. I had so many excuses lined up, and I was like, should I even tell people? Is it going to discourage them if one of their leaders is like messed up the thing? And I just came to a point where I was like, hey, I believe in alignment. I've been talking about alignment. The aligned thing to do is just to tell people, right? Like, this is the same thing I'd want from them. So I went and told them. And it's interesting because I've seen people, I know they've messed up because we haven't heard from them on the check-ins, and they've just completely ghosted. So there's so many different responses we can have to this when we're in the river of change and you have a setback. Because setbacks are always going to happen. It's expected. You're trying to change a neural network in your brain that's been built for a really long time.
So I think this is where spirituality meets the road, right? Where we're talking about actually going down the river of change, and there's going to be some current and some things like that because you've conditioned this old behavior over and over again. So kind of, for me, I got triggered recently as well with something else, and something else that just triggered me. So when that happens, guys, like the thing you want to do ideally is use your spiritual tools at that point, right? That's when it's most important to use them. So when something gets triggered, like immediately, you don't want to go as soon as you catch it. This is why meditation is powerful. You can catch the trigger. It doesn't mean, and you still might go down that old pattern a little bit, but the process of spiritual change, of real change, is to get back on track as soon as possible. So forgive the change, right? Like expect it and then forgive yourself, right? This is why, forgiveness is a practice of any spiritual development. So forgive yourself for that, and then get right back on track as soon as you catch it, right? Journal it out or whatever you have to do. Feel that, whatever it is that's feeling, that's coming up, right? But something's going to trigger you. Like you're going to get triggered. Like it's going to happen. Like life is going to show up. And if you fall back off track, get back on. And what I've noticed, David, I'd love to get your feedback on this, is you're always going to get better. If you make the commitment to get back on track, you never lose what you gain spiritually. Like you're always going to get better. You just got off track for a sec. What are your
Yeah.
thoughts on that?
No, I think, and that really is the response, right? There's so many. I think you're in a very vulnerable space when you're in the, like we said, the river of change. You're in a really vulnerable space when you hit that point where you do have a setback, because the brain now, what you've done, and this is interesting because you think, right, we have neural connections, right? So you're trying to break that neural connection. And I think there actually comes a point, like if you've ever, you can see videos on YouTube that show like how a neural connection happens. And it's like weird. You see these like two things wiggling like this and then they connect. It's almost like a magnet is like boom, right? So I think what happens is, especially, so if you have a setback early, you probably haven't even broken the connection yet. But if you're hitting that 21 to 90-day range that they say it takes to build a habit. And I would say, depending on what you're building, it might be, if it's something really difficult, it's going to be on the higher end of that spectrum. And if it's something relatively simple for you, it should be on the lower end of that spectrum. If you have a setback, it's almost like your brain is back in that wiggling part, right? Where those neural connections want to reconnect. And I think you're in a vulnerable spot then, because your brain's going to give you every single reason to be like, no, go back to your old way of thinking, go back to your old way of being, right? And it wants to, it'll punish you with different pain and stuff like that to make that happen. So you're in a vulnerable space, and the only correct response is to just get back on the horse and keep going.
Yeah, it's almost like the body and the mind are against you. And they are, because you've conditioned
They're completely against you.
Yeah.
You've conditioned it to do something that you don't want to do. And this is the other reason that it's got to be, you have to have a level of toughness with yourself of being like, you know what? I effed up. I'm going to get back on the horse in whatever it is. But then you also have to have a level of forgiveness with yourself, because if you're too hard on yourself, you're gonna like be defeated, right? I think as guys, like depending on your personality type, some of us like that, like, like you freaking messed up and you need to like get yourself up and go. But other people, depending on your personality type, might need a little bit more of a gentle voice. And you need to understand what resonates with you, and you have to be able to talk to yourself in that way. What I would say is there's always a dialogue that seems to be going on, right? People talk about it all the time, our self-talk. You need to be talking to yourself at these points when something goes wrong, not listening. Because if you're listening, that voice is going to give you all the reasons to quit, to give up, to be like, oh, you messed up. You're never going to change. Here you are again. Look, you suck, like all this stuff. And you need to start talking to yourself and speaking to yourself rather than listening to yourself. Because if you're listening to yourself, you're going to have a problem. And you might even need to do it verbally, right? We talked about the power we have to create. There's something in our words. So you might even have to get verbal with yourself and be like, look, man, like talk to yourself in the mirror, whatever it takes.
Yep.
But you do not want to continue down that path, because even if it was just a short period of time, you've already begun to disassemble that network and you've made progress. And, 5 days of change is stronger than 1 day of setback, even though it might not feel like it is.
100%. No, I agree with you 100%. Some of the things I wrote down is you want to limit the amount of time you get off track, right? Because we're all going to get off track. But now if you can catch it, and you can catch it sooner, because like, again, like Dave says, you start to rewire that. So you want to, once you see you're off track, hey, I caught it. Let me forgive it, right? And you can use the whip or love or whatever you want. But like, I love what Dave is saying too about like, dude, talk to your human.
Yeah.
The soul of you didn't mess up. The soul of you didn't make a mistake. The old human that you conditioned made a mistake, right? But like, that doesn't mean you like not love that person. You created that person. So like, just have a conversation with yourself and forgive yourself, and let's get back on track. And, one of the things that I've been going on the river of change and a lot of different things is if you're tracking the river of change, if you're tracking what it is you're improving on, and it's a daily track and you're making notes and you're journaling on that because you're committed to change, you're committed to going on that river, what you'll find is, man, I'm a lot better than when I was a week ago. And I'm a lot better than I was, so like, as you start to track progress, you just can't see it if you're not tracking it. So if if you're tracking it and you're making journals about how you're feeling, because this is about a way of showing up, it makes a big difference, because now you can see, you're like, you know what, I just had a bad day, or I had a bad moment, but overall I'm still way better than when I was when I first started.
That's so true. And I think there's two areas that we could probably speak to here. One, when you get that actual setback and you do or don't do the thing that you're trying to change, right? That would be one thing. But then also when you hit that point of awareness and you're really feeling that strong pull towards the old self, what are some ways you can battle it? So maybe like starting with the first one, what are some of the lies to recognize, right? So I'll give some examples in my life. Let's talk about diet, right? Diet's something that I'm pretty on track with. You know, I don't eat a bunch of crappy food, but there have been times in the past when building up my discipline to where it is now that, you know, I would say raid the cookies or something, right? Wife, I love these Tate's cookies, man. If you've ever had these, like these gluten-free cookies made by this
I know
like
exactly
baker.
the ones you're talking about. The
They're
taste cookies, the
they're
green
so
ones, right?
freaking
The
yes,
green
man.
thin
They're
ones,
so
yeah.
good. Rick keeps these on hand all the time, and I finally got to a place where I'm just like, okay, I don't know, go near them. But like, there were times when I was working on this discipline that I would, you know, flip up, and I would find myself having a Tate's cookie, but it wouldn't stop there, right? Because then here's a common lie the brain tells you: oh, you've already screwed up today. You know, like you're already done this. Like you might as well just eat like, you
The whole
know,
bag.
half the bag, right? Or
I'll
like
eat the whole bag.
right? Sure, right? And then you're like, yeah, there's kind of truth to that, but that's so much BS, right? Because it's like, who said anything about today? You're not even guaranteed the next moment. So like, why do we have to think in terms of days? Let's think in terms, okay, you screwed up this minute, the next minute starts, right? Like let's start over here. Let's not be thinking in terms, because it could be, you know, depending on your like time frame you're thinking on, you could be like, what if it's a New Year's resolution? You could do the same thing. You could be like, oh, it's February, I screwed up my New Year's resolution, I guess I'll start again next year. Like, what? Next year? Like, it's February 2nd. You still got 8 months here. So this is a common lie that I've seen my mind tell me when something like that happens. It's just like, oh, you might have. It's basically this very clear script. Oh, you've already, so you might as well.
Yep.
And you can fill in the blanks with anything.
And I like what you said last time we spoke of, like, trade the short-term, you know, the short-term dopamine hit for the long-term gain, for the long-term growth, right? So this idea of like, hey, this cookie feels good in the short term, but long term it doesn't serve me. So this idea, like what happens for me, and let's talk about that example because I have something similar. I'm generally fairly clean. I might overeat, but if I overeat, it's on like good things. But if I'm looking to like lean out, or if I'm looking to play a sport better, well, then I've got to like lower the weight. So I want to play the sport well, for example. I end up overeating or eating things that aren't in that track. What I also noticed too is if I'm eating that cookie, let's use that example, and I'm eating the whole brownies, right? I'm usually in a high stress state, and my body, I'm not hungry for the cookie. However, the mind and the body want the cookie, but there's something underneath there that is driving that behavior.
There is something underneath there. It's almost like, and this is why the awareness and being quiet with your self process is so important, because you really want to figure that out. You're going to be thinking it's the cookie forever, but it's not. There's something that has made you like, because you know, it's so weird, right? Like you'll be completely fine, and all of a sudden, boom, it's like, oh, I just got this craving. There's something that typically triggers it, and I do agree, it is a stress state.
Yeah, and what I've realized too, Dave, and the mind is hungry and the body is hungry. I'm not hungry. Like it's the body and the emotions that want to eat. Like I'm not hungry. It's the emotions that are hungry or the mind that's hungry. Like I'm not hungry for the cookie. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. And it's like, it's figuring out what is that. It's almost like you need to almost get quiet then at that point and unravel the whatever's going on here and figure out, okay, what is it that's really driving my mood right now? Like, yeah. What is it? And you probably could. Something interesting that I've been trying to do recently while meditating is, because, you know, if you do any type of length of meditation, our minds wander. Everybody knows that. Like, even if you're really, really good at it, your mind's going to wander. but then you catch yourself and you bring yourself back. But what I've been trying to do recently is actually figure out what is it that my mind is wandering to when it first wandered, because that should tell you something about what's going on in your subconscious. What is it that my mind's wandering to? Is it a problem? Am I starting to think about work? Am I starting to think about, things that I want? Am I starting to think about where I feel like inadequate in life? Like, what is it that you're going to? And, you bring yourself back. And sometimes it's hard because, meditation, you get back into it. Sometimes you might even forget, or sometimes you almost get into a really deep state. You almost go to sleep, right? But if you can come out of it and then just have that moment where you write down whatever it is, you'll probably start to see patterns over time that will tell you a lot about yourself. What is it that your mind is going to when it first begins to wander? And you're never going to figure that out in real life because there's so much stuff going on all the time. You're never going to figure out what is actually distracting you because it's just too much. But when you're in those quiet states where you're working on reprogramming yourself, that's when you can really figure out a lot of stuff.
One of the questions I started to ask, sometimes when we get in a stressful path or a path where we tend to do behaviors that aren't in alignment with our highest good, things that we're looking down as we go down the river of change, once we get into a stress state, could be something else that triggers that or whatever, or an anxious state, that's when we find ourselves most vulnerable to it. And a lot of times we think the cookie is most nourishing, but really, if we stop in that moment and catch it and just sit down with ourselves, sit down with your human, I call it like that, like sit down with your human and talk to your human, and then ask the question, what would be most nourishing right now? And it usually is going to be a meditation or a nap or some breath work, something to get you out of that place that you think that cookie will get you. Because the cookie, when you're eating the cookie out of a place of you feel like you need the cookie, it usually ends up where you feel bad after. And that's exactly the behavior we're looking to change. We're looking to change the behavior of things that take advantage of us, where after we do them, we feel bad. If you want to have the cookie because your soul wants the cookie and you're enjoying the cookie, by all fucking means, eat the cookie and enjoy that. But if you're eating the cookie because you're escaping something else, because you're stressed or because you're anxious, that's not going to nourish you.
No, you want to avoid the things that are going to make you feel bad after. And it's probably good. I would actually recommend this as an exercise for people is stop and think, what are all the things that do make me feel bad after? What are the things that I do and regret? Because those are the things that you probably want to remove from your life. And I've said this many times, discipline is the removal process. It is the process of removing things from your life that you do not need. It's like you think about like with a child, right? Child does something incorrect and you're like, hey, you're going to your room, or I'm taking away the iPad for the day or whatever it is. You're removing something so that they learn. And that is the same thing that we're trying to do with ourselves. We're trying to remove things so that we learn that it's better this way. And learning is often a process of unlearning when you're working on disciplining yourself. It's funny too, because you even think like biblically, right? You don't hear this anymore, but like Jesus had disciples. John the Baptist had disciples. What does disciple even mean? It means people that are disciplined. And what are they disciplined in? They're disciplined in the teachings of that individual they follow. But we don't really use that word anymore. It's very odd, right? I don't meet many people that are like, I'm a disciple. Like, but technically, if you're disciplining yourself, you are a disciple, which is interesting, right?
I think the big share here is like what you don't want to do, guys, is beat yourself up. You're going down this river of change. It's vulnerable. Most people don't change because it's hard. The actual process of change is hard, and you've got to commit to it. And this is where the discipline comes in, and the forgiveness comes in. And discipline doesn't mean like you beat yourself up when you fall off track, because that never works. We've tried that already. When you beat yourself up, it doesn't work. You're beating up at the human for making a mistake, and like all that is like doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. So what I is like forgiveness is huge, and like this, from we spoke about last time, D, I've even started like I've been reading A Course in Miracles, and he talks about like offering it up to the Holy Spirit, because the Holy Spirit can see the truth of you, but can also see the lie. So he can see that, hey, you're going for this cookie for something else, but he can see what's really going on. And so I find that like in the process of forgiving yourself, I kind of ask the Holy Spirit to help forgive that in me. I still feel whatever I got to feel, whether it's the anxiety or depression or whatever that is that's coming up, that stress, I feel it. And then after I feel it, I sit with it. and I forgive it, or ask the Holy Spirit to forgive that in me, and I sit with it a little bit longer, and it's uncomfortable to sit there, right? It is. I'm not gonna BS you, but I find that I feel better after, way
Yeah.
better than having the cookie, man.
And so that's interesting. So these are some of the things I think to remember when you do mess up, right? One, like you said, we don't want to beat ourselves up. Two, you don't want to believe any of the lies your mind and body is going to tell you. It's going to tell you a whole bunch of stuff. One of the common ones, like I said, is you've already, so you might as well, right? If you beat yourself up, it's very easy to quit, right? Because you're going to be like, oh, well, I'm just already, this happened. So like this, because it's like, it's so painful that you're just like, your body's like, well, the pain of beating myself up was almost worse than what I actually did. So now I need something to comfort me from that. So I'm just going to go back to that again, right? And it's just becomes this unhealthy cycle. So those are some of the things for sure that can happen when that happens. The other thing I would say is you are when you have accountability in your life, which I think is a very important thing for change. You want to have accountability.
Yep.
It's another reason that a lot of people don't change, because you've tried to be accountable to yourself, but like, let's be honest, right? Your word with yourself hasn't been very good thus far, which is why you're in this place to begin with. So if you think you're going to be accountable to yourself, who you've probably been lying to for years to get to you wherever you are, depending on what your situation is, it's probably not going to work. So it's better to have some accountability. But the other thing is you can just lie to your accountability people too, right? Which is not going to help you either. So you got to be willing to get vulnerable. You got to be willing to be honest if you want to get past whatever it is. That's really important for when you do have a setback. But what about when you have those moments of awareness and you're on the precipice of a setback, but you haven't actually had a setback yet? What do you think are some practical tips that we could offer to people that are in that situation? Because first off, I would say if that's you, that you're on the precipice of having a setback, first off, good job that you've noticed that, because you probably had many times in your life where you never noticed that at all. So I think you need to be able to give kind of like celebrate the fact that you are even aware in the first place, because most people aren't, and you probably haven't been either at many times in your life.
Yeah, this is why Dave and I kind of push on or stress on or even just practice meditation, because the meditation will help you become aware of these things like that you weren't aware of before. This is why meditation is powerful in your day-to-day. Yeah. Like, congrats on catching it. Most people go unconscious the majority of the day. So you just caught it. So one, celebrate that, hey, I caught it. So now you can actually make a new choice. Because Dave, if you don't catch it and you're on autopilot, you can't make a new choice.
No, you can't make a choice. You can't do anything. It's almost like the autopilot switch is stuck. I know a couple of guys that are pilots, and as far as I know, the only time that most pilots are actually doing anything is when they take off and land, right? I think that's when they're actually in control of the plane. But then most of the other time it's on autopilot. But if you're on autopilot going the wrong way and you don't realize it, you're going to end up in the wrong direction, right? So until that pilot becomes aware of it, can take control of the plane again and either reroute it by doing something with the autopilot or steer it back on course, the plane is going to go to the wrong place. So it's exactly what you said. When you're on autopilot, you can't do anything. You need to get off of autopilot.
So one, let's kind of, I love what you said about accountability. Accountability is huge. But again, you can dupe accountability by, not being vulnerable and honest, right? So I've got a workout partner I work out with, and we work out together, and the workouts that I do with him are just way better, right? Because we're both pushing each other. And normally the human left to himself is always going to do less than what he think he can do, right? Because I'm not going to let him off the hook, and he's not going to let me off the hook, and we're not competing. We're just pushing each other to what we normally wouldn't do. So like, and this is what's great about the human race. Like, we'll do more together. So if you can do things where you have somebody else and you're actually doing the activity with, what's a lot harder to lie? I don't know if you've got someone like that where you work out with them. It's like, all right, the workouts are just better, or whatever that is, right? This is why we go to Joe Dispenza's events and meditate as a collective, because you're accountable, but also the vibration is way higher because you're doing it as a collective.
And I've had some of my, it's funny you say that, because it's very true. I've had my best meditation experiences in a group setting. Yeah, I think so. Here's a couple of tips that I would probably give someone if you're having that moment of awareness. One, you probably want to get around other people. If you isolate, you're kind of like setting yourself up for failure, right? So that would be the first thing I would say. You've got to get around other people. The second thing I would say is you need to remember that no matter how strong whatever you're feeling is right now, that feeling's going to pass. It always does.
Hmm.
Right. So I think the brain starts to do the exact same stuff, right? It's going to start lying to you just like it has after you've had a setback. It's going to start lying to you, and it's going to be telling you like stuff like this feeling is never going to go away. And the feeling's freaking uncomfortable, right? You
Yep.
have this like hunger for whatever it is you want, whether food, drugs, alcohol, porno, whatever it is, right?
Yep.
You
Yep.
have this like hunger for it. The lie that your brain's telling you is this feeling is not going anywhere. But we know that's bullshit because feelings can change very fast. Don't believe that lie. Make sure you don't isolate. And the third one that I would give people is this is an important one. I actually like it. Somebody told me this the other day. It's funny because we were just talking about cookies. But David Goggins says have a cookie jar. And what he talks about is like when you're a kid, you have a cookie jar where if you're hungry, you can go and get a cookie out, right? And he's like, you need to have a mental cookie jar that you can go to. And again, it's funny because we are just talking about cookies, but it's like you need to have a cookie jar you can go to mentally to be like your past victories, your past times when stuff seemed like it wasn't going to work out and it did. That you can go and you can grab one of those cookies and be like, remember when you did this and you made this choice and it turned out really good for you, right? And you can even do the opposite. It could even be the opposite. Maybe because people are drawn toward pleasure, but they're also want to move away from pain, right? So maybe it's like, remember the last time that you did that, or you made this choice and how much it hurt you, right? Like you felt really crappy after. Remember that and go there for a second and feel that, because that might be the exact thing that was going to snap you out of that.
I mean, one of the things that kind of we spoke about earlier was that little list of like where you've won already. So like there's this book I've been was reading, and it's about a monk, and he built this brick wall, but all the it was like 1,000 bricks, but he would focus on the 2 bricks that weren't perfectly aligned with the other ones. Well, why not focus on the 998 ones you got right?
Yeah.
Like focus on the other bricks. If you focus on the 2 bricks that are off, like, but we do that as humans. We tend to like focus on the ones where we didn't kind of live to our potential. But dude, there's 998 good ones. You know what I mean? So where you put the focus on, I think, is huge. What you spoke about, I kind of wrote this down about isolation. I think that's huge. Don't isolate. We tend to do that. That's when you want to open up and share. Talk to your wife, talk to your spouse, talk about someone about the way you're feeling. And I love what Dave said too. This idea of this too shall pass. This feeling is going to pass.
It's going to pass. It's going to pass. And it's going to pass a lot faster than you think, man.
Right.
Like a lot faster than you think. It's not going to be like a whole day. It probably is not even going to be a whole hour.
Right.
Surely you can wait it out for an hour, right? You're going to feel different quick.
Right. And what I find is it passes faster if I just sit with it. If I sit with this, I like this. I learned this from Michael Singer. He wrote The Untethered Soul, and he wrote
I've read that.
The Surrender Experiment. Yep. In there, he says like he kind of like, you sit back here and he goes, I can handle this. So this thing that you put down there, this emotion you created that. It's going to come up. And if you stored it with pain, it's going to come up with pain. It wants to release. It wants to get up out of you. So if you can sit and just close your eyes and say to yourself, I can handle this, and let it come up, and then forgive that. That's ultimately what it's looking for, because it doesn't want to stay in there. The reason it's coming up is because it wants to be free. It wants to get out of you, right? But what we do as humans is we fight with it. We're trying to suppress it. And if you're playing the suppression game, now you're giving it power. I'd rather you do anything else but fight that emotion. And don't do that. And then kind of the thing I said is like, what would nourish me? Like I ask myself that question whenever I have moments of awareness, like what would really nourish me? And sometimes it's just some breath work or laying down. And it's usually something that like, dude, get out of this place where you think you need that and just stop. But we in the human world want to like, oh, let's keep going. I got more to do. And then you don't give it space to come up. So you drown it with more stuff on the outside. And that never feels good long-term or short-term, really. Because once you're done eating the cookies, you don't feel good after. It didn't resolve anything.
It didn't resolve anything. And I think the other one that's really big, man, because both you and I have done Tony Robbins' work, is changing your state, right? And he talks about the triad, which are the 3 elements of your state. It's your language, your focus, and your physiology, right? And sometimes, like, your language is often your internal talk to yourself. And sometimes, like we said, like you can't really, like you want to talk, not listen. And your focus is whatever you're focusing on. Well, oftentimes you're going to be focusing on the emotion, but physiology is easy to change. So you're in a certain state, and that state is producing the emotion. Try changing your physiology. Do something that's going to get your heart beating a little bit. Do some jumping jacks, jump up and down, do some burpees, whatever it is. But something that will change your state, and then boom, that could actually be one of the quickest fixes to get yourself out of that situation when you're on the precipice of having a setback.
Yep. Go for a walk. Go get in the sun.
Whatever it is, right? Here's one other one I would throw in there too, because both of us said this, right? That oftentimes these things come up when we're stressed. Something has triggered us, because you're definitely not, you're not in creation mode, you're in survival mode. You're feeling emotions of stress that are driving you towards a behavior or something that you shouldn't do, or something, or to not do something that you should, right? So you're feeling these emotions of stress. Gratitude. You got to get into a place of gratitude. Again, this is kind of like a cookie jar type thing, but what are you thankful for? Because you cannot be in a state of gratitude and stress at the same time. And when you're stressed and you're in survival mode, like we talk about manifesting things in your life, you and I both know about the quantum field. When you're in that feeling of stress, you're basically putting out all this like not good energy that could potentially attract not good stuff into your life, right? You don't want to do that. You want to be attracting the best stuff. And we know this. Gratitude is the ultimate state of receivership. So get out of that stress state, be grateful, start thinking of all the things you're grateful for, something that makes you smile. Maybe it's your dog, your wife, whatever it is, right? Get into that place, and that's going to help change it too.
And this is kind of like, as I'm going on this river of change for the last 2 or 3 weeks pretty intensely, at the bottom of every day, I write down, hey, look, what can I celebrate today? Where did I win today? Where did I show up differently? Like today, in my way of being, with a child of God or the child of man. And some days it's less, right? The percentage is less, or in some days it's higher, but overall, the trend is up. So it's like, start to acknowledge these wins, these cookie jars, these celebrate. Like we're all very good at beating ourselves up, but we're not very good at like, dude, I did this today, I did that today. And then once you stack those up daily, you start to build that bank of like trusting yourself, right? Because it's like we don't have a lot of deposits in that bank, but once you start to know that you can trust yourself and you can handle this, you start to build a little track record, and you could rely on that track record. Yeah.
Well, this has been a good conversation, man. I think it's helpful for people, because everybody's been in that situation where they have a setback or they're on the precipice of a setback. And these are, I think, some very practical tools that people could use to deal with those things and get themselves to that next level. Because at the end of the day, and here's something, like, again, things, whatever emotion you're feeling, it's not going to last. But the other thing is, when you stick with it, one of the authors I've been reading right now, his name is John Gordon. I don't know if you've read any of his stuff. He's got a book he just came out with called One Truth. It's really, really good. And he says, stay on the roller coaster. Think about a roller. I don't even like roller coasters, but they kind of follow this like typical thing. You hear that cranking noise and you're going up, and you start getting apprehensive. And maybe if you're afraid of heights, or you're afraid of that feeling of your stomach going like this, you're probably thinking, I want to get off this thing, right? But you're buckled in. You don't really have a choice. In life, we kind of have the choice, so we can jump off. But if you just stay on that roller coaster, yeah, it's going to feel super uncomfortable for a minute. But when you get to the bottom of that drop or that loop or whatever it is, eventually that roller coaster is going to come to a standstill. Your bars are going to come up and you're going to walk off that thing, and you're going to be perfectly fine. And that's how it is with all these situations too. And it gets easier as you continue. Like if you're trying to change something in week 1, it's going to be harder than it's going to be in week 4. There's going to come a point where it's almost like it's not even difficult anymore. You just, maybe every now and then you have these like weak moments that, you're on a precipice like we're talking about. You have to remember. I remember a guy who I knew. He was actually a heroin addict, man. And he talked about it like this. He's like, when I was first coming off heroin, it was like I had a dog barking really loud right next to me. And the stupid dog was like constantly, right? This constant thing. But then he's like, later, it was like, okay, now the dog was loud, but it was, across the room. And then eventually it was almost like, the dog was just kind of sitting there in the room. It wasn't making noise anymore. And then the dog was taking a nap. And then the dog wasn't even there. And that's how it is with change.
Mhm.
It's going to get to the point where there's not really an issue anymore.
Yeah, just like we said, the roller coaster metaphor, guys, and I think one thing that's good for everyone, like be watching this is we're all the same. We all, we think that these emotions that that we're alone in this, but we all the cookie might be different, but the feelings of the anxiety or the stress or whatever it is are the same. We're all going to experience the same emotions going down this river of change. And it's like, and it gets easier over time. So know that the more I make this new choice, the easier to make this new choice in the future. And then ultimately you get to a place where once you get off the ride, or once you kind of just make this new choice so much, it becomes part of your identity. It becomes part of who you are. So like going to the gym, right? Initially I didn't like it. Initially, but now it's just kind of part of what we do, and I enjoy it. I enjoy the reps. I enjoy the hard. Like I'm like, I get after a bad set, I'm like, dude, that was fun. And my partner's like, fun? Yeah. I'm like, so we're both on the same wavelength of like,
Yeah,
you
very
learn
true.
to enjoy these things. And that's ultimately like the roller coaster. And maybe not initially, over time, but maybe you can teach yourself to enjoy this, enjoy going on the river of change, enjoy the roller coaster of change, and understand that sometimes that river is going to fall and entail you falling off.
Yeah.
And
And
it's not a reflection of you. It's not a reflection of you're bad or good. It's just part of the process.
it's so true, man. So true. Well, dude, this has been a good conversation.